Tonight's live stream is on the air, and I'm going to let everybody on social media know that the show is about to start. So just give me a few seconds to let everybody on social media know what the show is on, and I'll get into tonight's topic. Oh, what's going on, Black Manta 777? What's going on, Computer Robots? What's going on, TMAC 87? Glad to see you here for tonight's show. And before I get into tonight's show, I have some news about several SJS Direct projects that I want everybody to know about. Now, the next book in the John Haynes series, John Haynes Godbreaker, will be available on March 31st. So if you want to pre-order your Kindle, Smashwords, or Google Play digital copy, you may do so right now, and you'll have that book in your device, like your tablet or your smartphone, on March 31st. But if you want a pre-order on Kindle, I'm going to drop a link to the Kindle, and you can drop a pre-order on Kindle of John Haynes Godbreaker right now on Amazon.com. And in addition to John Haynes Godbreaker being available, we also have another John Haynes book of finally available that I've been wanting to offer for some time. And that book that's now available for you guys to go out and purchase is the John Haynes at Death's Door comic. The John Haynes at Death's Door comic is finally available for everybody to purchase. And everybody who missed John Haynes at Death's Door on Kickstarter, you now have a chance to finally get the first John Haynes comic and be able to read it in paper format with the regular cover. So I'm going to leave a link to John Haynes at Death's Door, the comic, and you guys can now finally get your own copy of John Haynes at Death's Door on Lulu, and the price is the same as the Kickstarter was. You'll be able to get it for the same price that everybody got it for, but with $4 less shipping. So it's a lot cheaper with the shipping this time. That's what I did when I was checking out Lulu. So you'll be able to get John Haynes at Death's Door, the comic, from Lulu. The same book, the same paperback style. You'll be able to get your own copy and check out the first full John Haynes comic. So I'm hoping everybody who missed out on the Kickstarter picks up the John Haynes comic. I'm hoping you guys pick up the John Haynes comic and John Haynes Godbreaker. These are the last two books in the John Haynes series. So once you pick these two up, you will be practically up to date as the current books, and then you can go back to the later books and get caught up on John Haynes' story. So that's part of the news. And I wanted to give everybody a progress report on the next John Haynes book, which is John Haynes 1987. I just talked to Mike Williams, the artist who does the covers for the John Haynes series, and I've sent him the concept. So we're going to see what he's going to come up with as related to the concept for the 1987 cover. And I'm hoping to have John Haynes 1987 out very soon. So the 2023 catalog has several John Haynes books coming out. We have Godbreaker, we have At Death's Door, the comic, and we have 1987. But unfortunately, the Isis and Easteen books for 2023 will be delayed because I'm still trying to regroup as related to the storyline, and I want to make sure that the books are of the highest quality. So I'm decided to put a delay on those books until I can write a story that meets the high standards I've set for myself and keep things consistent as related to the SJS Direct imprint. Hey, Gabria, Bradley, glad to see you here. And with all of the perfunctory done, I'm going to get into tonight's topic. And tonight's topic is where I ask a very critical question: is the MCU in crisis? And looking at the reviews for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, it looks like the MCU Phase 5 is turning into FAIL5, and it's looking like the MCU is on a further road of decline that really started in FAIL4, I mean Phase 4. Now, it looks like to me that Kevin Feige knows that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is in serious trouble, and he knows that if he cannot get the MCU right and back on point, he won't possibly be the captain of the ship that navigates the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, back in 2008, 2009, Kevin Feige was considered to be a brilliant strategist as related to setting the course for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the series of movies that adapted Marvel Comics to the screen. And as he set the course between the Marvel superhero movies, Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America, to set the course into the Avengers movie, he was considered a genius as related to creating the link between all four of those movies to pay off in the formation of the Avengers team. And Kevin Feige had great success all throughout Phase 1 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phase 2, but I could see the wheels starting to come off the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Captain America Civil War. Now, I believe that Captain America Civil War was a very good movie. Unfortunately, you could see the cracks as related to the MCU starting to form as related to story and structure, because we had Captain America Civil War create the cracks in the structure of the second act, that's where we started to see real serious problems. And these problems actually started to get worse after Captain America Civil War with the Spider-Man Homecoming movie. Now, a lot of people liked Spider-Man Homecoming. Unfortunately, Spider-Man Homecoming, when I really looked at it from a critical perspective, I could see a lot of cracks as related to the structure of the MCU. And those cracks were that Kevin Feige and the producers over at Disney were starting to get a little too comfortable with the characters. And as they started to get comfortable with the characters, we stopped seeing them staying true to the source material. That was a big problem I started to see with Spider-Man Homecoming. And as they created Spider-Man Homecoming, what they did was starting to deviate from the source material and started telling their own story. And that's the same mistake that derailed the Superman franchise, starting with Superman 2 when the Salkins didn't really like Richard Donner's vision. And the same thing happened over at Warner Brothers with the Batman franchise when Joel Schumacher took it over. Once Joel Schumacher and the Salkins changed course, they started adding in elements that they thought would appeal to the audience. And these elements they started to put in were this excessive humor. And the same thing was happening that they did with Superman 3 and Batman Forever is the same thing that happened with Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming. We started to see the excessive amount of just jokes being wedged in. We started to see a complete deviation from the original source material. And as the Infinity Saga started to close its second act, we started to see serious cracks inside of the stories of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that's where we started to see real serious problems with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, most people would say, oh, the movies were still good, but I started to see where there started to be problems towards the end of Phase 3. And as I started to see these problems starting to arise creatively, people were saying, oh, that there wasn't any problems, but I could see creatively, because I've been a writer for over 30 years, and I know when there's a creative problem, because I remember back in the day when Simpsons were having their season 9 or so, I said, okay, there's a problem here with the writing. Same thing with Xena Warrior Princess in season 5 or so. I said, okay, there's looking like some problems as related to the writing, and the writer's room really needs to correct course. Unfortunately, what we saw was the writer's room not correcting course, and both of those shows had serious states of declines because they just went off the road. And the same thing was happening with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And a lot of people wanted to get to the end of the Infinity Saga. They thought it was going to end with a bang. But sadly, the Marvel Cinematic Universe started to deviate from the source material. It also started to add these really useless elements of humor. And the thing that really started to really see the decline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Now, Avengers Infinity War, basically, it was a movie that, as I see it, was structurally just went off the rails. And then we had Avengers Endgame, where the entire story just fell apart because the heroes stopped being heroes. Because when we had Avengers Endgame, it was supposed to be a powerful conclusion. Unfortunately, to get to that conclusion, Kevin Feige started to compromise the characters of the Marvel Cinematic Universe by compromising their ethics. And once the characters started to compromise their ethics by going back in time and creating their own Infinity Gauntlet, what that did was it made it where the heroes stopped being good guys and there was no clear delineation between good and evil. And that's where the Marvel Cinematic Universe went off the rails completely in Phase 4. And as we lost Tony Stark and the Marvel Cinematic Universe lost its way because it didn't have its lead character anymore, what happened was the Marvel Cinematic Universe started to go into a serious state of decline. Now, Kevin Feige could have had his flawed Marvel Cinematic Universe end with Avengers Endgame. He could have put a period at the end of things. Unfortunately, Disney got greedy. And as Disney got greedy, what happened was they were looking at that billion-dollar box office. They were looking at Avengers Endgame making over $2 billion at the box office. And they wanted to keep the Marvel Cinematic Universe as the #1 franchise. So they wanted to keep pumping out movies because Disney basically put themselves in a bad situation when they went out and bought Fox and bought all of Fox's catalog. They went out here, took out a lot of loans to buy Fox's catalog. They were in a lot of debt and they needed the Marvel Cinematic Universe to keep making money. Unfortunately, the Marvel Cinematic Universe's story had peaked, and as the Marvel Cinematic Universe's story peaked and had hit its conclusion with Avengers Endgame, they were hoping to keep the movie going and keep the movies going so that they would be able to pay their loans and be able to absorb the cost of the purchase of Fox. And they thought, oh, we'll be able to continue making these movies, not understanding that, yes, you have a catalog of over 4,000 characters over at Marvel, but a lot of those characters just were not cinematically viable for adaptation, one. And two, a lot of the projects they were presenting in phase 4, basically were not appealing to the audience. I mean, when I looked at a lot of the phase 3 movies, I could see a lot of cracks as related to the stories. I could see a lot of cracks as related to many of the characters. And I could see a lot of these movies not really looking as viable over time. And when I looked at the phase 4 movies, I knew that they were going to be failures even before they started shooting, because I looked at a lot of the concepts they announced, and I knew that a lot of these concepts, they just were not economically viable long term as related to box office, because the audience really didn't know many of these characters. And what's even worse was Marvel, as it was pushing towards phase 4, they were looking to not stay true to the classic Marvel characters. What they were looking to do was go and focus on the identity politics and social justice narratives of the all-new, all-different Marvel. And the all-new, all-different Marvel wasn't a success in the comics, and that should have been an indicator to those executives at Disney that it wouldn't be viable at the box office, because usually what gives people incentive to go out here and watch the movies is seeing adaptations of the stories that were successful in the comics. Because in 2008's Iron Man, we got basically the David Michelinie and Bob Layton Iron Man brought to life on screen. And with the Incredible Hulk, we got a fairly decent adaptation of the Buscema era Hulk. And with Thor, we got a basically Kirby or Simonson mix. And with Captain America, we got a very good Stan Lee, Jack Kirby Captain America. So we got adaptations that were very true to the source material in phase 1. But when they started going and trying to adapt these newer characters, that's when FAIL5 really started to really cause the state of decline with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because when they started adapting these characters that were poor sellers, the audience just had no reason to be interested in them. And many of the stories never answer a critical question a screenwriter like myself has to answer. And that question is, why should we care? Because most of the phase 4 movies never really gave you a reason to care. And they came out starting out of the gate, as I see, weak with Black Widow, because nobody had a reason to care about Black Widow, because we already know that Natasha is dead. So the audience had no incentive to really watch Black Widow, because we already know that the end of her story. And with us knowing the end of her story, there was no real reason to care about Natasha. And Natasha's story wasn't building into anything significant as related to the overall storyline. Now, we got, after this, I believe we got The Eternals, which was a movie that I really believe should never have been made, because Chloe Zhao was basically out of her depth. She was not qualified to make a superhero movie. No, she didn't even have the experience of someone like a Sally Richardson Whitfield, who has worked on fantasy projects. And the artsy-fartsy Eternals movie that she made was unwatchable, and it turned out to be one of the major films to start the process of Marvel's superheroes films underperforming. And with the Eternals, we never got a reason to care. I mean, it just didn't flow organically into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. because where were if these characters were so powerful, why didn't they help stop Thanos in the Infinity War? Why didn't they help deal with things as related to the Infinity War? And why didn't they come in and help out? Then you had Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, another film that was trying to introduce a new character. It was an okay movie, but again, really didn't fit into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and really didn't really give you a reason to care about this character or see how he flowed organically. Again, a lot of these projects that they were announcing really didn't flow into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which actually still had real structural cracks as I see it, because when they announced the time jump of 5 years later, that basically wound up destroying the entire structure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as I see it, because once you had this 5 year jump, and then you had these heroes compromise their ethics by going back in time, the Hulk snapping and bringing everybody back. What happened was you've got this whole paradox now where all of those people who had died are now back alive, and you've got these people who don't know about what happened 5 years ago. So you have real serious structural problems with the Marvel Cinematic Universe in its efforts to adapt the Infinity Gauntlet, not understanding why Nebula snapped the Infinity Gauntlet and made everything back the way it was 24 hours ago. Because in the comics, Nebula, when she got the Infinity Gauntlet, reset everything. And when Nebula reset everything, it made it where everything kind of flowed back to normal. And the only people who knew were those on that Thanos platform. But Marvel didn't want to do that because they thought it would be too predictable as related to the MCU. But this further damaged the structure at the beginning of Phase 4. And as this went out here and did damage to the structure, this led to the Marvel Cinematic Universe really winding up becoming extremely rickety. And as they built on the foundation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the projects they were producing were of poor quality in Phase 4. And each of these projects that they further built on it did further damage to the timeline, did further damage to the structure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because Kevin Feige was caught up in his ego about trying to launch all of these projects, not understanding that every time you launch a project in a universe story model, every story has to flow into each other, and they have to flow into each other organically, because if they don't flow into each other organically, you wind up with problems as related to continuity. So the Marvel Cinematic Universe has a real serious continuity problem that started with Avengers Endgame, and it's gotten worse with each passing story. And as each passing story has come, the overall structure got worse because they were so greedy, caught up in trying to get the money for Disney Plus, trying to get the box office for the MCU, but they weren't thinking about how these stories were adding to the overall Marvel Cinematic Universe. And because they weren't thinking about how they were adding to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this is why the Marvel Cinematic Universe is in a really dire state as I see it structurally. Because when I look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it just seemed the structure, it has a lot of damage from the storylines of as I see it, Infinity War and Endgame. And then compounding this, you have the series WandaVision, where they were trying to fix this by saying the Scarlet Witch could alter reality, but nothing really flowed organically because you're introducing the Eternals, you're introducing Shang-Chi, you're introducing Loki, and you're trying to put spit and tape on this overall crumbling structure when this structure really needs some real bulldozing to knock out some of these serious continuity issues. And this is the problem with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, again, has real serious structure issues that need to be bulldozed. But once those structure issues, they're in place when you're doing a continuity, it's hard to get these issues out, and it's hard to reestablish that structure. And that's basically where it has Marvel's Phase 4 a complete disaster, because Phase 4 put a lot of structural damage on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it made the Marvel Cinematic Universe be put in a place where you cannot just really build on existing stories and further move the continuity forward. I mean, it's hard to move the continuity forward at this point, because you can't do like you do in a comic book, because a movie audience is different than a comic book audience. In a comic book, yeah, you could have Nebula go out here, take the Infinity Gauntlet from Thanos, snap the entire Marvel universe back to normal, and make it like it was 24 hours ago. But when they introduced the 5-year timeline to try to age up some characters, this derailed the entire structure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And as they were out here, they saw there was a lot of cracks and damage. They built on the cracks and damage in Phase 4. And as they built on the cracks and damage, what happened is the overall structure is crumbling, and the whole structure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is basically on its way to collapsing. And that's where the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as I see it, is in serious crisis, similar to what happened with DC and their crisis of infinite Earths. I believe that DC and like Marvel, again, their universe is in a crisis. And when I look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's in a crisis because Phase 4 really has serious structural issues that can't be ironed out with another attempt at time travel. That's what they were trying to do with Phase 5, with the movie Quantum Mania. They were trying to use Quantum Mania to try to rebuild the structure into Phase 5 and Phase 6. But the problem is that once you have structural issues, you just can't iron them out with time travel and Deus Ex Machinas, because the problem with time travel storylines is that they really start to get convoluted. And as I was reading the synopsis for Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantum Mania, I started to see there's a real serious problem as related to the overall structure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This structural issue, again, is a serious one, because when you have structural problems with your stories, you cannot build further into a continuity as related to a universe, because that structure, once you establish it in a cinematic story model, once you establish a structure, you have to follow the structure, and that's the only way you can wrap the form around it of the story. But if you tear down structure and you don't really understand how it works, what happens is the structure can't hold the story, and the story falls completely apart. And that's where the Marvel Cinematic Universe, as I see it, is in crisis at this point. And we've got Kevin Feige, who was the darling of a couple of years ago, 15 years ago. He's now scrambling to try to save the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because he knows that if he does not fix the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he will go out in an extremely ignominious fashion as related to his job. He's going to be fired because he did not know when to put a period at the end of things. Because as a creator myself, I understand the importance of knowing when to put a period at the end of a story. And I also know the importance of knowing when to end a story, because as a writer, you have to understand when to end a character story, because when you understand when to end a character story, you can leave on top. And that's where Kevin Feige is jammed up right now. He's jammed up real bad because he knows that he stayed too long and he stayed too long because he thought, oh, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to be an endless money train. He thought it was going to be an endless stream of movies that would do well at the box office. Unfortunately, he got caught up in his ego and he caught up in the fame, not understanding the entertainment business. Now, anybody who's been in the entertainment business knows that just as this project is starting to make money, you need to start making plans for the exit, and you need to have an exit strategy because this revenue stream is eventually going to end. Unfortunately, over at Disney, they were not really thinking about the end of the revenue stream like any smart person in the entertainment industry does, like myself. They're not thinking about the end. They're thinking, oh, we've got all of these IPs as related to Marvel. We'll be able to keep making MCU movies for the next 20, 30 years. And that's a foolish notion as related to film. Usually, most people who work in the entertainment business know you've got 3 to 5 years at best, and you need to start going out here and working on creating the next big property. That's what anybody in the business would be doing. They would be like, okay, yeah, you want to do your MCU, we'll do MCU movies, but eventually I need to start working on developing some new concepts on the side, maybe doing a comedy, maybe doing another type of sci-fi or fantasy project. I need to come out and figure out a new direction for where I want to go, because eventually the audience is going to get tired of superhero movies, and I need to find an exit strategy so I can go out here and start making money on the next big thing. Unfortunately, Kevin Feige thought, again, there was going to be endless Marvel movies. It was going to go on forever. And as he was out here, he was loading up the projects out here. And he basically, with Phase 4, wound up overwhelming the audience with too much product. And that's another mistake that Kevin Feige made in leading the Marvel Cinematic Universe off the road to profitability, because the Marvel Cinematic Universe dropped 50% of its box office, and it did not lead to the rush of Disney Plus subscriptions. No, it didn't lead to that because he made a major mistake in over the course of Phase 4, that I already saw him making with Phase 3. I was saying, you're making too many projects, and when you make too many projects, the audience, they get overwhelmed. They feel like they can't watch them all. And the audience, they can't digest all of this content all at once. This was something I myself had to deal with back in 2013 when I wrote 13 books. I wrote 13 books in 2013, and I published 13 books in 2013. And it was a lot of books, and the audience just couldn't digest all of those books. And that's when I started scaling things back as related to the SJS Direct catalog, because, I knew the audience could digest maybe 4 books a year, and they only had enough money for 4 books. So out of respect for my audience, I said, I'm going to pull stuff back, and I'm going to scale stuff back, because it's just too much material coming at the audience all at once, and they can't process all that media. I mean, American audiences and audiences all over the world with the internet, they are bombarded with material every day, not just Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, not just comics, not just graphic novels. They have hundreds of TV shows to choose from on streaming services, hundreds of old movies, hundreds and even millions of books. I mean, there's also lots of YouTube content. So people are bombarded with content, and you have to be considerate of your audience, because the audience needs to breathe. That's something that I understand about content, is that the audience, yes, they love good content, but you got to give people time to breathe. You got to give them time to be able to process what they've watched. And that's what we got in phase one. That's what we got in phase two. But when he started with phase three, we started to see this saturation of content, and it became overwhelming for the audience to be able to just digest all of this content. That is something, again, that I know from experience all about from 2013. And it's also something I know when I'm writing books like in the ISIS and Ease Team series. Now, last year, I just put the ISIS character through to a story called Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. And the year before that, she was fighting in the main event. And then she was in Escape from Transylvania. And after that was Bride of Dracula. And I said, after 4 action stories, I've got to give the audience a breather, and I've got to let the audience rest and be able to process all of the action. So I decided that to create ISIS Legacy, do a little story about that, the Thetas, and introduce the Colleen character, but make it a story that was just a little slower because the audience needs to breathe, the audience needs to rest. And I do the same thing with stories like in the East Team series. I would do things like The Witches of Eastland, and then possibly I would do a story like Goddess of, I would do stories that would allow the audience to take that break, be able to process everything that they've experienced, because after an intense action series, people need a minute to process everything that they watch. I mean, this is why shows like Buffy or Xena would have comedy episodes. They would do the comedy episode because after I've given you intense action, I got to give you a minute and a break to think about what you just watched. And I got to give you a minute to rest before I move on to the next action sequence. This is all part of good storytelling. And good storytelling is all about giving your audience that time to really think about what they're watching. And Kevin Feige wasn't giving people that break because he was so greedy and so caught up in keeping the MCU relevant that he didn't understand. Ironically, he was making the MCU become less relevant. And he was making the MCU less relevant because you're bombarding people with constant content, and bombarding people with constant content, it just overwhelms people. It needs to be less is more. And this is where the Marvel Cinematic Universe, FAIL5, is starting to form, because we're getting these bland movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, and Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania just showed how we have serious quality control issues because Kevin Feige's been rushing out content. I mean, we're seeing cracks as related not only to the stories, but with the CGI, with shows like She-Hulk, with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. I mean, people are getting burnt out as related to working on these movies, and they're getting burnt out because they're just rushing out so much content. And as they rush out so much content, it just makes it where you get overwhelmed. And I know from my own experience, you keep trying to rush out all of these projects, and you're doing it because you think you're under pressure, but you've got to slow down, and you got to slow down because what you're doing is rushing out material. And when you rush out material, what happens is your material isn't of good quality, because back in 2013, I ran into the same problems I'm seeing Kevin Feige dealing with right now. I wanted to do 4 ISIS books a year. And when I started to do a book called My Sister and My Frenemy, and I started to see lots of typos and sentence structure issues, that's when I said, I gotta stop and I gotta slow down. And that's what Kevin Feige needed to do with phase 4. And it looks like he's scrambling to try to keep the train on the track. But the problem is that he's made a lot of serious mistakes as related to FAIL 4 and now FAIL 5. And he's made these mistakes, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's in a really dire place as related to the structure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it's also in a place where they're having problems as related to the overall mechanics of the system that for creating material, because Kevin Feige, as he was making Phase Fail 4, he made a lot of tactical errors. And one of the tactical errors he made was trying to adapt the material of the all new, all different Marvel. Now, that could have been Bob Iger pushing that, but the whole thing is that material was not strong to adapt. And in addition, we had a lot of so called activist or social justice types. And these social justice types, they were not qualified to adapt material. But many of these people, like what they say Jessica Gao was, they weren't qualified to write material like she was on She-Hulk. And this led to more structural problems as related to the screenwriting. And the screenwriting is something every film studio has to really think about, because like a car painter, the writer is part of the prep. And in order to get a good quality movie, your writer has to do good prep from the beginning, because it's his prep or her prep and their research that leads to you creating a quality story. And when I look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there is no prep as related to story, and the screenplays, they have been rushed out as related to the Marvel Cinematic Universe over the last couple of years. When I look at the synopsises for movies like Eternals, when I look at the screenplay synopsises for movies like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Mediocrity, and I look at the screenplays for many of their Disney Plus shows, there's no real care taken as related to the writing. And since there was no real care taken as related to the writing, what happens is this is why we have this decline in quality, because in order to be able to make a quality adaptation of a show, you need writers who go out here and care about the source material. And this is where things are starting to bite Kevin Feige in the backside, because he himself said he didn't want to hire screenwriters who had a passion for the characters, and him not hiring screenwriters who have passion for the characters is what led to many of the issues in Phase 4, and look like they are leading to creative problems with FAIL5, Phase 5. Because when you don't hire quality writers to write your screenplays, you get adaptations that aren't really true to the source material, because the writers are coming out of things from their backsides or from the dark parts of their imagination. And that's how we get abominations of shows like She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. That's how we get bland shows like the Ms. Marvel show. That's why we get material like the Eternals, and we get material like Thor, Love and Blunder, where we have, I believe his name was Chris Hemsworth, talking about he wanted to do more comedy. We have people thinking that they know better than the comic creators and better than those who have skills in screenwriting like myself. They think that they know better, and the whole thing is they go out here and adapt material. And as they're adapting material, they're bringing their personal ideas into the material and preventing us from seeing what we want, which is the comic book come to life on screen. And that's one of the things that's leading to the MCU being in crisis. They go out here and they didn't hire quality screenwriters because, again, like that car painter, everything is about the prep, and the screenwriter has to prep the material and make sure that the material is of the highest quality, because it's the screenwriter who has to create the structure for the story. They have to answer the three critical questions: who is the main character? What do they want? And most importantly, why should we care? Because if I don't answer those three questions before I put fingers to the keyboard, you're going to get a bad screenplay. And if a screenwriter doesn't answer those questions, you're going to wind up with these really mediocre movies. And that's a big problem as related to the MCU with their Disney Plus shows and their movies. They really didn't take the time to go out here and really think about these characters, what they wanted, why we needed to care about them. They really didn't think about how everything was supposed to fit organically in previous work. This is the kind of work that comic writers have to do all the time, and even screenwriters have to do all the time when we're working on serialized projects. We have to think about how it's going to flow into another story and how it can remain consistent with another story. I mean, this is a problem if you don't know how to do this, because this is something I've been doing again for 30 years with the various stories I've done with building the SJS Direct universe over the last, I mean, about 15, 20 years. I have to think before I write a story how it's going to flow organically into previous stories, how the actions of the characters remain consistent, what my story points are going to be, what the theme of that story is going to be. And nobody's really doing that over at the MCU. They're just picking concepts, announcing concepts, and you just can't announce concepts without ever thinking critically about how it's going to flow organically. No, what Kevin Feige wants to do is he wants to focus on getting towards the bigger offices of Fantastic Four and X-Men, but getting towards the box office of Fantastic Four and X-Men, you need to have an organic road. And I don't see how he has an organic road. I see how he has a convoluted road with Quantum Mania. And Quantum Mania, as I see it, again, this is a meh movie. You're bringing in Kang to be a deus ex machina to try to undo things that were done in Infinity War. And you want to bring this whole group of Kangs in here to alter the timeline so that we can go with Kang Dynasty, go into the Secret Wars, and hopefully reset everything. But that type of reset, yeah, that works in a comic, but it doesn't work in cinema, because in cinema, everything that you put on the screen has to be there for a reason. And when you do this to the audience is not going to really find that to be something good. No, they're going to be really frustrated with this, because they're going to say, why did I invest my time in watching all of these movies if nothing mattered in the first place? So that was why I always thought, the whole Infinity story was a really bad idea to adapt, because it creates structural problems. And yes, the Infinity Saga was something that a lot of people wanted to see, but it creates again, issue with the audience, because they invested time in this movie. And now you're telling me that all of the movies I watched no longer matter. So you wasted my time. And when you waste the audience's time, the audience gets upset. So that's why you have to be, again, careful about how you build your universe. That's why you have to be very careful about how you build on your stories, because every story that you do in a universe model has to flow into other stories. It has to fit into other stories, and it has to flow into those stories in a way that gives a viewer an incentive to go back and read previous stories and go back to watch previous movies, because you're not only selling the movie that people are watching right now, you are selling the movies that people want to watch that came out before. And this is something I've run into myself when I'm doing SJS Direct books. I mean, people will ask me, okay, where do I start with the SJS Direct universe? And I will put it in the back matter of the book as related to the story of a character like John Haynes. I will say, okay, these are John Haynes' appearances in the SJS Direct universe. It starts here in the back matter, and you can just pick the stories that you want. If you want to read it chronologically, you can do so, because I put it where you see how all the stories flow together in the back matter. And again, this is how you get people into the backstory. But when you do things like time travel and things like that, it makes it where the audience gets confused, because you're making it hard for them to understand where to go. So that's something that you don't want to do, because you want to make it as easy as possible for the customer to come in. That's something I was doing when I came out with the John Haynes at Death's Door comic that I put on Kickstarter last year. I wanted to make it where everybody could come in. I mean, once you look at the front cover, you can look at the back, and the back shows you how all of the books as related to the characters, so that you could come in and just see John's story from first book to last. Again, you want to be able to give the reader an easy pathway to the character and their stories, and that's something that the MCU is making a mistake on as related to time travel and all of this stuff. Yeah, this stuff works in the comic book, but it does not really work well in a movie. And when you're doing movies, you have to really watch what you're doing. That's why Jon Favreau said not to kill Tony Stark, because Jon Favreau understands film. Jon Favreau warned Kevin Feige, I believe, not to kill Tony Stark because he understood Tony Stark was the lead character of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and when you killed Tony Stark, you basically killed the person who was our gateway into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You killed the character who was leading us into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because everything starts with Tony Stark, and he is the guy that introduces us to all of these different characters. Because when you understand how things work in film, you understand that once that lead character is gone, the most of the audience walks away. And that's what happened with the MCU. Once Tony Stark died, people had no real incentive to go watch the later characters. All the characters we liked were Tony Stark were gone. Steve Rogers was old. The Hulk had been turned into a complete beta male who had been emasculated, and Thor had been turned into a clown. So people had very little reason to care, and that's why the MCU right now is in crisis, because we have serious structural issues as related to story. We have characters who have become caricatures of themselves, and we have lots of projects that were announced that really were not strong enough. And now we have Kevin Feige scrambling to delay these projects because these projects are basically not going to get ratings. I mean, many of the Disney Plus shows were not pulling high ratings as related to FAIL5. I mean, She-Hulk was a certified flop. We had many of the other shows like Ms. Marvel never really catch on. And outside of a few shows like maybe Moon Knight and WandaVision, we really have not had these shows take off the way they expected. And now we have Kevin Feige pulling a David Zaslav, going out here and looking to delay shows like Ironheart and Echo, because while they push the so-called strong woman in many of the comics, what they did was go out here and they have filmed a lot of stuff that they're stuck with, similar to what happened at Warner Brothers with all of their movies, like the Batgirl movie they threw in the trash, the movies that they're putting out right now, like the Shazam movie, the Flash movie. They're stuck with a lot of expensive turkeys, and now they're scrambling to try to find a way to shore up the brand. That's what Kevin Feige is doing right now. He's trying to shore up the brand in order to keep his job. So what he's looking to do now is trying to delay many projects. But what he doesn't understand is that by delaying projects like Echo, which is supposed to lead into Daredevil Born Again, is you're creating domino effects, because when you're building a universe of characters and stories lead into other stories, what you're doing is creating dominoes, and the dominoes, as they fall, it creates an even bigger mess. Again, this is why you have to be very careful about the stories you add to a universe when you're in a universe model, because all it takes is one bad story to basically derail a character. And unless you're a skilled writer, you're not going to be able to catch that story and be able to save a show. Like when I remember watching Xena Warrior Princess, I remember the Dayhawk storyline not really catching on. And thankfully, they were able to catch it in time and introduce a new villain, Callisto, who basically saved the show from the Dayhawk character who wasn't getting over. And I remember with Buffy in season 4, when they had the cyborg guy, and the cyborg guy really wasn't catching on. And thankfully, they were able to shift the gears on the cyborg guy, and they were able to save Buffy. And we were eventually able to get to good storylines like Dark Willow, which is considered, as I see it, a classic. And that's all because the writers were really realizing, hey, we're getting these reports from people. They're sending us emails, they're sending us letters telling us the storyline ain't working. And they were able to course correct. And that's something that a seasoned writer has to do. They have to know when to course correct on a storyline when it's not working. And unfortunately, the MCU under Kevin Feige didn't understand when to shift the gears because, like a guy who drives a stick, you got to trust your instincts and know when to shift the gears and get your story out of that gear as related to things. What's going on, Rob? IS. Yeah, Jayhawk was in Hercules too, but they wound up just scrapping that character. They saw that the character wasn't getting over. And Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert realized, hey, this story ain't working. It's not getting over with the audience. We're looking at the ratings. We're looking at the numbers. And they were able to shift course on that story. And they were able to get the show back on track. I mean, that's a skill that a good screenwriter has and a good producer has. They can say, hey, I see this character is not getting over. I can see this character ain't working out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a period at the end of that character. I mean, I've done it myself with a couple of bad guys in the ISIS series and the E-Steam series. And you have to be that kind of guy when you're running a show. You have to know, okay, that's not working. It's not, I got to put a period at the end of things. And if I want to keep this show in production, I got to move on to a different bad guy, somebody who is appealing to the audience. And I got to wrap this up and be able to move on to something better because another storyline could get me the ratings or the box office that I want. Major Balls, you're saying that I'm like the Simon Cowell of the MCU. Well, I'm doing what any seasoned executive would do if he's running a studio. I mean, you got to be hard on the stories because the stories are part of the box office. So you have to really be hard on stuff and be objective when you're working on a universe that's experienced that I've had over 20 years as related to writing the SJS Direct universe. When I'm writing SJS Direct universe stories like I'm doing in the ISIS series or the E-Steam series or the John Haynes series, or even on other books like Eternal Night, which is tied to the SJS Direct universe, or a book like the Spinsterella trilogy, I got to make sure everything flows organically so that when you come into a book, you can come into other books and everything flows consistency. Now, Major Balls asks what ignominious means. Ignominious means humiliating. I found that word when I was watching an episode of Superman, the animated series, and he wound up talking about Calabac and how he was humiliated by Superman and the episode Father's Day. That's my first run into it. And then I went and looked in the dictionary, and this is ignominious, as I see it, as related to the way the stories in some of them cases are. Now, what's going on, Matt Torrance? What's going on, Your Ignite? And when I look at, again, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I mean, it's in a major state of decline, and they're trying to right the ship, but the way they're righting the ship is all wrong because they're trying to go and do this through this whole time travel stuff, but the time travel stuff doesn't create a story where the heroes can be defined as heroes. No, the whole time travel thing makes it where the heroes are not ethical. It's a real serious problem. They made a lot of problems for themselves as related to the structure of phase 3 going into phase 4. And again, this is why you need a seasoned professional writer to be a part of your creative team, because they can sit there and tell you, okay, this is where you're going wrong. You got to really watch what you're doing here, because what they were trying to do with Ant-Man in Infinity War was use him as a quantum ex machina and use that quantum ex machina to undo everything that Thanos did as a way to get around a convoluted ending that it was in Infinity Gauntlet, but it made things even more harder to follow as related to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So you got to really watch where you're going when you're writing these kind of stories. And again, this is why the MCU is in crisis, because they did not really focus on the structure of their stories. All they were thinking about was box office, characters, and getting people excited about seeing said characters. But if you don't think about the stories you put those characters in, what you're going to do is make bad shows like She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, and you're going to make shows that really don't flow into things organically, like Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, where you're trying to pander to audiences instead of telling your story. And that was a big problem with Phase 4. They were looking to pander to the social justice crowd, but the social justice crowd were not the people who went out here and bought tickets that made the MCU an iconic brand for an entire generation. No, it was many longtime comic fans like myself. It was many casual fans. It was many kids. And that should have been the core audience Kevin Feige focused on. But no, he looked to try to focus on the social justice groups. But the social justice groups don't go to the movies. No, the social justice groups, they pirate movies on Wi-Fi at Starbucks and coffee shops. And as they're pirating movies at Starbucks and other coffee shops, they're watching these movies for free, not concerned about trying to go out here and support the product and not looking to support the next movie or anticipating the next movie. And that's where the MCU is in a fiscal crisis, because the MCU is in a fiscal crisis because they're not really pulling the box office, pandering to the social justice types and pandering to audiences. Many of the longtime comic fans like myself, I walked out at Infinity War and I haven't come back because I'm not seeing the Marvel characters I grew up with in Marvel Cinematic Universe movies and Disney Plus shows. No, I'm not seeing those characters. And because I don't see those characters, I'm walking away because I don't see heroes anymore. I see people who compromise their ethics. And that was a turnoff for me. And that's where I see the MCU being in crisis, because as I see it, Kevin Feige compromised his ethics. And then he showed no respect for comic fans in that episode of She-Hulk, where he basically threw up a middle finger up at comic fans. And that's also part of the crisis. You don't understand customer service at all. That's what I believe Kevin Feige doesn't understand, that I understand. I understand that you have to respect your customer. You have to show gratitude to your customer. And you show respect and gratitude to your customer by providing them with the best quality product that you can provide. I mean, when I'm out here doing SJS Direct books, I thank every customer who buys a book and I show my appreciation for them. I go out here and show respect from any artist I work with by making sure that they're paid on time, and I give them time to do their projects. Again, showing respect for people. And I'm seeing a lot of disrespect directed at MCU fans as related to Kevin Feige. And I'm also seeing it being directed at many MCU fans as related to companies like Hasbro, which produce products like Marvel Legends action figures. I'm seeing a lot of disrespect directed at those who pay the salaries of everybody by going to these movies. And it's something that really irritates me, because as a publisher, I appreciate every customer who buys my products. And again, it's about showing respect. And I see it where Kevin Feige took the customer for granted. And as he took the customer for granted, he was passively producing books and movies, well, really movies and TV shows, and aggressively not concerned with the quality, because the contempt shown to many of the MCU fans with She-Hulk by saying, oh, this is a show made to troll the fans, that is extreme disrespect directed at people who were out here spending their money to watch these movies, spending their money to go out here and buy subs to watch Disney Plus, and you're going to make an entire TV series made to troll those people. That's disrespect at the highest level, and it's something I would never engage in because I want to show respect for those who pay my way and allow me to be able to come online. Those who go out here and give and support my work. I appreciate all of those people. And again, Kevin Feige showed disrespect for many of us who went out here and watched these movies. And that's really something that, as a businessman, I took deep offense to, as related to the She-Hulk show and the decline in quality. And instead of coming out and apologizing and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry for the quality of the She-Hulk show. We're going to try to get things right," what they're doing is scrambling, looking for a way to try to get the MCU back on track, instead of first coming out and apologizing for the poor quality, apologizing to the customer for going out here and just not creating quality material, and setting a plan of action and a way to rebuild the infrastructure of the MCU to get quality back on track. No, what they're doing is saying, "Oh, we're going to delay some projects," but those projects have already been filmed. So you've got material that you've made out here that you've basically wasted money on, and you're not really thinking critically about how, again, your business structure and your business model, because you thought the money was going to go on forever. And you thought you could foster a codependent relationship with the completist, out here. You thought that you could make the completist go out here and run and to the next movie. You thought they were going to go keep seeing movies, not understanding that the customer has to care. And the only way that the customer cares is if you show the customer respect, and you show the customer respect by making sure your product is of the highest quality. And that's what the MCU hasn't been doing with Phase 4, and FAIL5, Phase 5. When I hear problems like I heard with the Blade movie, that you have a screenwriter who basically messed up an entire script, that's a problem, because it shows that you're not on top of people to make sure that the writing is up to standard. No, they wanted to check a diversity checkbox and hire a Black woman to write a Blade script, instead of firing somebody who has a background in writing vampire and horror stories like I do with Eternal Night and the ISIS Vampire Saga. These are that you want to get somebody who has experience, who will go out and read and study the source material, pay homage to films like Wesley Snipes' Blade. You want somebody who's going to put quality on screen, and somebody who's going to show respect. But Marvel, with Kevin Feige, didn't do that. No, he was hoping to virtue signal, "Oh, I've hired a Black woman to go out here and write Blade," but the woman went out here and wrote a horrible script that could not even be filmed. Again, setting that production back, costing it millions of dollars, showing me that the MCU is in crisis under Kevin Feige's leadership, and now he's trying to shore up this sinking ship. But the problem is that he, as I see it, has lost his way as related to his vision. He's lost his way as related to direction, and he's lost his way as related to everything as related to story. So that's a big problem I'm seeing with Phase 4, and FAIL5, Phase 5. The movies are of poor quality, and the MCU is in crisis. They are pulling projects, they're delaying movies like the Marvels, projects that the audience told Kevin Feige they did not want. And now that the box office is suffering, he's trying to fix these films the same way Warner Brothers tried to fix Black Adam. But the problem was that Kevin Feige did not maintain a system to ensure that quality maintained a high standard. Now, this is something that I focus on all the time. When I'm working on SJS Direct books, I'm always focusing on making sure that the books remain consistent, the quality remains consistent, and that the material remains the same. You want to make sure that the customer has a satisfying experience. And I know it's a challenge to go out here and make these movies stay fresh, because I have that same challenge, because I don't want to go out here and keep writing the same Isis or E-Steam story, or the same Smithsterella story, or the same John Haynes story. No, I like to switch it up. I like to do different stories and ideas, but maintain the integrity of the characters. So there's a lot of work that went into things, but Kevin Feige started to take for granted. And that's why I see the MCU being in crisis right now, because the MCU is in a really bad place creatively. And I believe Kevin Feige may not be able to survive the things, because he's lost a lot of money. He's lost a lot of merchandising. I mean, Marvel Legends figures ain't selling like they used to. I mean, I remember when Hasbro was a powerhouse, and if you announced Marvel Legends out here, people were running and scrambling to put in a pre-order. But these days, I've become, myself as a longtime collector, I've become apathetic as related to a lot of these Marvel Legends figures, because they make characters I don't really care about. And again, you need the right person running the MCU to bring that passion back, bring that spark back. But I don't know if it can be possible, because it's that structural damage that was done in Phase 3 that's just impossible to repair. That's the big problem as related to the MCU. He's trying to hit a Control Z and undo that damage with Kang. But that's why I say you don't introduce things like these characters that do time travel, because time travel makes for a convoluted solution that makes it where the audience feels like, hey, you're wasting my time. And this one would really, again, it hurts the audience, because they're the ones who felt like they wasted their time. Because while some cared about the Infinity Saga, I believe the thing to do with the Infinity Saga was to snap everything back to 5 years before, make it where the heroes nobody died, and we go back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, back to what it was, and we are able to have more adventures with these characters later on. If you have to recast Tony Stark, you recast Tony Stark. If you have to recast Steve Rogers, you recast Steve Rogers. But you go out and create a storyline where the audience gets satisfied. The audience feels like, hey, these friends of ours are still here, and we're able to be with them for another adventure. That's what people wanted. And again, that's where Kevin Feige made the mistake, because Phase 4 created these structural issues and then built on top of them and did damage to the overall structure. And that's why the MCU is in crisis right now. And it may not be possible to fix that crisis at all, because you could do that with again, a storyline in a comic. You could do it with a reboot in a comic. But when it comes to film, people just have a problem with that, because, again, you wasted their time. And when you waste people's time, they have no reason to care. And you get a situation like what we get with the DC Cinematic Universe, where people are apathetic. They are angry right now because you have James Gunn and Peter Safran looking to undo the DC Cinematic Universe. And there he's looking to undo the DC Cinematic Universe, and because he wants to try to get it on track. But the problem is, you wasted people's time. People invested time in these movies. People invested their time in these films. And when people invest time, you have to give them something of value for their time. Because if you take their time away and you just go and tell them everything they watch doesn't matter anymore, then you hurt your DVD sales, you hurt your streaming sales, and they don't see the big picture as related to how reboots work, because reboots take momentum out of a product. And that's what happened in '98 when Marvel rebooted the Avengers, Fantastic Four, and Iron Man and Heroes Return. It really sucked the momentum out of those books. And we went from books that were selling 200,000 2 years before, when we had a consistent Marvel universe, to books that were barely doing 80 to 90,000. And then we had books when we had editorial change from Tom DeFalco to Joe Quesada. It wound up further declining, because with each passing reboot, you alienate more of the audience. And the same thing is going to happen with these movies. And that's why you've got these diminishing returns. Again, this is all about the understanding the business of entertainment, understanding the business of serialized productions. When you understand the business of serialized productions, you understand that you have to watch what you do in a production. One bad story, the audience will forgive, because I've had the audience forgive me for stories like Death of a Theta, or which was an ISIS series story people didn't really like, or a story like The Politics of Hell, which really introduced the Lucifer character. Wasn't my best work, and I'll admit that it wasn't my best work, but the whole thing is I would respect the audience and say, okay, that wasn't as good as I could make it, so I will go out here and try to do better. And they will respect a bad story here or there, but they don't respect you when you go out here and try to waste their time. And that's what the MCU was doing, and that's why the MCU was in crisis. And when I look at the start of FAIL5, I mean Phase 5, it's a further slide into decline that we got from FAIL4, I mean Phase 4. And all of that is because people weren't thinking critically about how they built on each story and how each story flowed into things. They weren't thinking about maintaining a standard as related to source material. They weren't thinking about maintaining quality as related to storytelling. And they weren't thinking about the overall model for the Marvel Cinematic Universe overall. So I look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe and I'm just deeply disappointed as related to things. But this is what happens when you have the wrong people running things, and people just take their jobs for granted, like Kevin Feige has taken his job for granted. I mean, he's really taken his job for granted, but he didn't really understand that you can't get comfortable. You have to stay competitive. You have to stay hungry. That's something I've always tried to do, is stay hungry and stay competitive, because if you want to go out here and build something, you've got to keep being hungry and looking for the next story and making sure that your next story is better than the last one you did. Keep working on improving your quality. And again, this is what happens when you hire a lot of people who have no, like BDB says, have no passion for the comics, have no passion for the material. Now, I have a lot of passion for Marvel characters because I've got a lot of comics. I've been reading these comics since I was 4 years old. I mean, I have a real passion for these characters. I want to see the best versions of those characters come to life, because when I hear things like a Black Wonder Man, that really aggravates me, because I know that character. I know that he's a 50-year-old white guy. I mean, I want to give people the best versions of these characters. And if I was in Kevin Feige's position, I would be looking to give people the very best stories and show the greatest respect to the late Stan Lee as related to these characters and this material, because it's a blessing to have that job. It's a blessing to be in that position. And you have to show great gratitude for that work. And you want to build work that allows those characters to shine and remain the great characters they were, and be passed on to the next generation to see how great they are. And sadly, they don't have people like myself in these positions who are passionate. No, they wanted to hire a bunch of social justice types. They wanted to hire through nepotism and cronyism, and hire people who weren't qualified. And that's why we've gone from an MCU that people loved to an MCU that is in crisis, and an MCU that is in really bad shape. It's overall damaged. It's overall got structural issues. And Marvel's FAIL5, I believe, is going to further derail the train. And it's further going to derail the train because you have people who really, they don't care. And because they don't care, they can't answer the critical question. And that critical question is, why should we care about the MCU? Why should we care to continue watching movies when we're seeing movies coming off an assembly line like Chevrolet Citations filled with defects and poor quality? Why should we care to continue watching movies if the movies aren't up to standard and up to a level of quality? Why should the audience keep investing in these movies Why should that's the questions I would ask Kevin Feige if I would have run into him face to face, because I'm not seeing that care that I put into many of my stories. I'm not seeing that passion for storytelling, because like BDB says, he says, they didn't even make the Gore character who he was. I mean, they just gave us Tyler Perry's Gore. They didn't give us the God Slayer that people loved in the comics. I mean, you didn't give me anything that gave this character depth or layers. You didn't really give me anything that's related to a story. You put up a bunch of Tyler Perry style jokes in Love and Blunder. You really didn't give me anything. And again, major disappointment overall. And when I look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I see a brand in crisis, a brand that's in trouble, a brand that desperately needs new leadership, and a brand that needs a visionary to show how great these characters are, and a brand that really, I don't know if it can be saved, because when you get structural damage, it takes a really, truly gifted writer to fix structural damage. And the structural damage here is something that I don't believe can be fixed. I mean, I believe that the greed over at Disney will lead to them making more Marvel movies until they start having flops at the box office. And I believe that if they start having flops at the box office, we may see the superhero movie go for another long period where we don't see them anymore, because what happens is that audiences tire, audiences burn out, and that's what I'm seeing with a lot of the audiences these days. A lot of people are getting burnt out because these movies aren't special. They're coming off an assembly line. They're not really something that make you say, hey, I gotta go see this. No, what I'm seeing with Marvel Studios is a studio in crisis, and a studio where we have the head looking to turn it around. But I believe the only way that it's going to end is with the MCU basically crashing and burning. Now, if you guys want to pick up your copy of John Haynes at Death's Door, you can get your copy on Lulu right now. And everybody who missed out on the Kickstarter, you can get your copy of John Haynes at Death's Door right now, and pick up a comic and see how I tell stories in comics. And you can pick up John Haynes' Godbreaker on Amazon.com in Kindle format and pre-order. I finally finished the draft, I think, of the paperback, so that's going to be ready soon. So this is just a copy, a proof copy, but I'm going to have a good paperback out, and it's already uploaded right now. So I'm trying to get all the kinks out before the official launch. But you can pick up John Haynes at Death's Door and the other books in the John Haynes series on Amazon.com, and you can pick up some of my other books. Thank you, Darius from Atlanta, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. And again, if you guys want to drop a Cash App donation to continue to help me stay on the internet, you can do that right now. You can drop a donation to the Cash App. And if you want to pick up some of my fantasy on the SJS Direct imprint and check out the entire SJS Direct universe of books in the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Haynes series, my vampire novel, Eternal Night, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, you can find all of those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. And I'm asking everybody to get the likes up before I get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. We have, I think, 29 likes, and we had 30 in the room. So if we get the likes up to 30, that'd be greatly appreciated. I'm working real hard on a lot of different projects right now. I got the John Haynes Godbreaker, which is coming out. Got the 1987 coming out. And I'm hoping, and I have a book by a friend of mine that I've been working on, The Retreat by Lawrence Cherry. It's coming, that's on pre-order right now. So the SJS Direct 23 catalog is coming together, and I'll be talking more about that in an upcoming video. So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and spending time with me. Good night, Gabriel Bradley. Good night, Computer Robots, and everybody here. I want to thank you all for coming out to tonight's stream. I hope you'll be there for next week's stream. Everybody have a good evening, and everybody have a good night. Thank you all again, and I'm hoping you guys all have a great weekend.